Sir, could you please stand up? This seat isn't meant for someone like you. On a flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, more than 30,000 feet above the ground, drifting through layers of cold clouds, time seemed to stop for just a moment. Julian Carter, a black man in his early 40s, polished in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, sat quietly in seat 1A of first class. A warm espresso rested beside a neatly folded copy of the Financial Times and a tablet. No one knew and no one asked that he had purchased the ticket 3 weeks ago using his account. No special privileges, no business cards, no assistant. Just a black man flying first class. And for some, that alone was more than enough to make it feel wrong. Elise Monroe, the blonde flight attendant with lips stretched into a smile trained to perfection, stepped forward. She leaned in slightly, but her voice was firm like steel wrapped in silk. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid this seat has been reassigned to a special VIP. I'll need you to gather your belongings and move to economy." Julian looked up. His deep brown eyes met hers calmly. No anger, no panic, just a quiet recognition like he had seen this moment 100 times before, only now it was happening mid-air. He gently set his espresso down, slowly pulled the boarding pass from his inner jacket pocket. The print was clear. Seat 1A. First class confirmed. At the bottom, member ID Carter Elite, priority gold. Elise glanced at the ticket, then back at Julian. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but it vanished just as quickly. "I understand, but this is an urgent request. The new passenger requires this seat for health reasons, and he happens to be one of our top contributors." She didn't say the rest, but her eyes did. "And you're just a black man dressed unexpectedly well." Julian didn't respond immediately. A few first-class passengers began to take notice. An Asian woman in seat 2B quietly turned on her phone camera. A middle-aged man in a silk shirt across the aisle raised an eyebrow, then looked away as if he'd decided it was best not to get involved. Julian opened his briefcase, retrieved his tablet, and then closed it. His movements were oddly calm. No one could tell what calculations were turning in his mind. How many times had he been mistaken for baggage staff or a private driver or a maintenance worker? How many times had he been called sir with a smile that barely concealed contempt? But this time in the sky, they weren't just doubting him. They wanted to erase him simply because he didn't fit their idea of who deserved to sit there. He smiled. Not because it was funny, but because he'd been waiting for this moment. Julian Carter didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a silver Mont Blanc pen from his pocket, as if he were preparing to sign a contract, not challenge an injustice. He wrote quickly on the back of his boarding pass, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. "I request to speak with the lead flight attendant." Elise's lips pressed together. Her eyes swept across the cabin, catching the whispers, the phones. Then she looked toward the front of the plane. No more stalling. She picked up her radio and murmured, "Brad, I need you up here. The passenger is non-compliant." Non-compliant. The word dropped from her mouth like a sentence, and Julian knew it wasn't just a description. It was a warning. "You're stepping beyond what we allow." 2 minutes later, Brad Thompson, the burly, cold-faced lead flight attendant, appeared like an air marshal. He stood tall, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning Julian with a calculated stare. "What seems to be the issue, sir?" His voice was even and low, but it offered no invitation for discussion. Julian handed him the ticket. "I purchased seat 1A 3 weeks ago. There is no valid reason for me to be asked to move unless your airline has abandoned the principle of honoring confirmed reservations." Brad glanced down at the ticket, then back at Julian. His eyes held meaning beyond the words. This seat has been specially requested by Mr. Gordon Miles. He is a senior strategic partner, a significant financial backer. He needs privacy and easier access due to a health condition. And I don't need privacy. I don't have health needs. Or is it just that I am not the strategic partner with the right skin tone? Julian didn't say that out loud, but his eyes did. From seat 2C, a white man in a silk dress shirt suddenly spoke up loud enough for others to hear. So what is the deal here? A black guy in first class makes people uncomfortable. No one responded, but the cabin air turned heavy. Elise took a step back. Brad swallowed hard. And Julian sat still, not defiant, not angry, just calm. Calm in a way that seemed to unsettle everyone around him. "I'll relinquish the seat," Julian said quietly, his voice low and steady. "But before I stand up, I'd like both your names and employee numbers." Elise flinched slightly. Brad hesitated, then handed over his badge. Julian quickly jotted down the information and slipped the note into his inner pocket. "One more thing," he added just as his phone buzzed inside his sleeve. He glanced at it. Emergency CEO briefing, Skybridge Holdings rescheduled 6:00 p.m. LAX Conference Hall. B. Julian smiled. Not a victorious smile, but the kind of smile that knew the real battle wasn't in the passenger cabin. He stood up, black leather briefcase in hand, and strolled. As if the most essential part of this flight was no longer about the seat, but how he left it. Julian Carter stepped into the economy cabin amid curious glances and hushed whispers. Passengers instinctively shifted to the side, letting him pass, as if something significant had just happened, though they didn't yet understand what it was. At seat 14B, nestled between a college student wearing headphones and a middle-aged man tapping out an email, Julian sat down. He placed his black leather briefcase carefully beside him. It didn't just hold documents, it had power. But no one in this cabin knew that. Not yet. Meanwhile, back in seat 2A, the seat Julian had just vacated, Gordon Miles, 57, CEO of Miles Tech, sat down as if it had always been his. He never once looked toward Julian. To him, the man who had just been removed was nothing more than a temporary obstruction. Elise brought him a glass of champagne. Brad leaned in to whisper something into his ear, and they both let out a chuckle. Everything seemed to return to the natural order. But in the economy, Sarah Nguyen, an Asian-American travel blogger seated in 17D, was replaying a video she had secretly recorded from first class. A black man, polite and composed, was asked to give up a first-class seat he had legally purchased. No explanation. No apology. Not even a direct look. Sarah adjusted her phone S-angle and tapped Go Live. "Hi everyone, I am on Skybridge Airlines Flight 709 and something just happened that I think the world needs to see." The live stream began, and within 5 minutes the initial 78 viewers had increased to 400, then 200, and then 500. Comments flooded in. Who is this man? Is this another racial discrimination case? Who gets kicked out of first class like that? He doesn't look like an average passenger. Meanwhile, at the back, Julian opened his laptop. The internal dashboard of Skybridge loaded executive control panel, HR reports, operational maps. No one around him realized that the man who had just been downgraded was overseeing the entire airline system. He navigated to discrimination protocols, then opened a new case file, Flight 709 Preliminary Incident Report. He took a screenshot of Sarah S. livestream, now going viral, and attached it to the report. Next to him, the college student peeked at his screen. "Are you like someone in the industry? You kind of look like a CEO doing real-time work or something. Julian offered a soft smile. Let's go with that. In first class, Elise glanced behind her. Her eyes caught the rising number of passengers holding up their phones. The air shifted. This wasn't a matter of handling a difficult customer. This was a scandal in the making, and they didn't yet realize they had just pushed the wrong person. High above California Flight 709 began its descent, but at 10,000 feet, another wave was rising not in the cockpit but on the internet. Sarah S. live stream hit 6,000 viewers. Messages started pouring in from accounts with green check marks, verified users. This is CNN, please confirm source. Civil rights now. Who is the black passenger asked to leave his seat? Looks like we re-witnessing mid-air racial discrimination unfold in real time. In first class, Elise checked her phone and went pale. The hashtag Skybridge discrimination was now trending nationwide. Tashtar, who is he, flying. While, black, first class. For whom? Brad whispered, we might be in serious trouble. Gordon Miles, still unaware of the storm brewing, smirked faintly. This kind of thing blows over. Guys like him don't have the power to stir up a storm. Back in the economy, Julian received a message on his secure line. It was from Sarah, not the blogger, but his executive assistant. The internet S on fire. Do we respond? Julian typed back, no statements, just action. He logged into the internal Skybridge crew system and opened the cabin staff profiles. 2 names appeared. Elise Morgan, ID 87126. Brad Kessler, ID 59004. In the notes section, pending review, flight 709. Julian added a line, suspend all flight schedules post-landing. Status changed to under investigation. Approved by Julian Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Skybridge Group. At the same time in the cockpit, Captain Ramirez received an urgent call from Ground Ops Captain. We have a media report tied to your flight. What kind of report? Discrimination. The passenger in seat 2A is involved. The press is demanding immediate confirmation. Should I make the report? No. Your superior will handle it directly. He is on board with you. Ramirez turned back to the passenger manifest. Line 3. Julian Carter, executive boarding gold clearance. His eyes widened. His hand trembled. We just wronged our CEO. At Skybridge headquarters in Los Angeles, the PR team was under siege with calls. The lead publicist gasped. What, who bumped the CEO from first class? Who approved it? No one. He bought the ticket, just like any other passenger. The truth began to unravel. In the economy, Julian sat still. His earbuds were in, but no music played. His eyes gazed out the window. His fingers typed steadily on the keyboard. He wrote, we do not respond with statements. We respond with systems. Bias when unseen cannot be corrected. But today, it has been recorded. And now the world is watching. At 3:46 p.m., Skybridge Flight 709 touched down gently on runway 2 at Los Angeles International Airport. But the air inside the cabin was thick, not from pressure, but from something Elise quietly whispered into her radio, landing confirmed. But we are about to face something far bigger than the runway. Brad furrowed his brow. What do you mean? Elise held up her phone. Her face had lost all color. You've just been live-streamed to over 70,000 viewers. In the economy, Julian stood as the seatbelt sign went off. No one spoke, but nearly every eye followed him. He strolled passing through first class. He didn't look at Davidson. He didn't look at Elise. He said only one thing, light as air. Thank you for the experience. I'll be using it in the upcoming meeting. In the jet bridge leading to the terminal, technicians, passengers, security guards, and even a TikToker were waiting. No one knew exactly who he was, but everyone sensed something big was unfolding. Sarah Chen, still holding her phone mid-live stream, stepped closer. "Sir, I am the one who streamed what just happened. Would you like to say anything?" Julian paused. His face showed no anger, no self-importance, only the calm of a man who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He held out a business card. Julian Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Skybridge Group. Keep recording. In 10 minutes, what you capture will begin to change this entire industry. Sarah froze. Her live stream viewer count spiked to 82,000. Plot twist, he's the CEO. The man kicked out of first class is the owner of the airline. This isn't T-drama anymore. This is history. At the Skybridge incident desk, receptionist Jennifer was updating flight delay notices when Julian approached. "Hello, sir. May I?" He placed his card on the counter. She read it and froze, her face going pale. "I'd like to speak with the station manager." "Immediately." "Carlos Montoya." The Skybridge station manager, with 20 years of experience, received a radio call. "A VIP passenger is asking to see you. A very VIP." When he arrived and saw Julian standing before a crowd, camera lights pointed directly at his face, Carlos realized for the first time in his life that he was walking into a storm with no exit. "Mr. Carter." Julian cut him off. His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a locked verdict. "I am calling for an immediate investigation into racial discrimination by the crew of Flight 709. Publicly, not behind closed doors." Far off in the employee corridor, Elise and Brad were rolling their suitcases, still unaware they were heading straight into the eye of a crisis. They chuckled, assuming it was over. But then they saw the crowd. They saw Julian surrounded by the press, and Sarah still live streaming. Elise froze. Brad mumbled, "What the hell? Why is he still here?" Elise looked at a passenger's phone screen. #Skybridge. Exposed. 120,000 viewers watching live. They started to understand. Too late. Julian turned to the camera. "Today I wasn't disrespected because I am a CEO. I was disrespected because I am a black man in a suit sitting in a seat I paid for and still not trusted. The question is, how many others have experienced the same without a camera, without power, without anyone to speak for them? I am here to represent them. The skies have never been fair. However, when bias remains unexposed, it persists behind closed doors. Today, those doors were opened, and the light came in." 4:57 p.m. Emergency meeting floor. 3. Skybridge Operations Center, LAX. The glass-walled room overlooked a sunlit runway, but inside, the light of truth was illuminating more than just numbers. Julian Carter sat at the head of the table. Across from him, Carlos, the station manager, Rebecca, the company's general counsel. 7 executives joined via urgent video call from New York and London. On the large screen, Sarah Chen's live stream continued to run. Viewers had surpassed 90,000. On Twitter, #Skybridge Exposed held the #1 trending spot in the U.S. for 3 hours straight. Rebecca opened the meeting with a firm voice. Per internal policy 12.4 on discriminatory conduct. The actions of the 2 flight attendants on Flight 709 constitute a severe breach and may result in immediate termination. Julian nodded, his eyes steady, unwavering. I don't need an apology. I need systemic change. He turned to Carlos. Do you have the full names and written reports from Jessica Morrison and Bradley Fields? Carlos nodded silently, though his eyes revealed unease. They still don't understand this goes far beyond a one-time incident. Just then the doors opened. Jessica and Brad were ushered in, still in uniform, having been given no time to change or prepare. Jessica clutched a tissue tightly. Brad tried to maintain composure, but sweat soaked his shirt. Julian looked at them not with vengeance, but as a man forcing truth into the open. I am not asking anyone to bow their heads. I want you to understand today I am the CEO. But tomorrow it'll be someone else, and the system is still yours. Rebecca tapped the screen. A video played Sarah S. live stream from minute 0 to 7:24. From the moment Julian was asked to leave his seat to the denial of his documentation and the call for security. Silence. Julian asked, voice level, I want to hear from you why a black man in a suit was not believed to belong in seat 2A that day. Jessica murmured, I don't know. I thought the seat, thought Rebecca cut in. Did you think or were you trained to assume that someone who looked like Mr. Carter couldn't be a first-class passenger? Brad stammered. I was just following procedure. And what procedure is that? Julian raised an eyebrow. Calling security when a Platinum Elite member asks to see medical proof for a reassignment? No one answered. The ticking wall clock seemed to hesitate with each second. Rebecca lifted a folder. In the past 2 quarters, Skybridge received 31 discrimination complaints, a 54% increase year over year. 83% came from passengers of color. Of the 6 with clear evidence, 0 resulted in termination. Not one. Julian stood up. His voice didn't waver, each word slicing through the silence. It's time we stop writing slogans and start writing accountability. He turned to Jessica and Brad. You are no longer crew members of Skybridge effective immediately. But this doesn't end here. He looked at Carlos. As of today, every Skybridge flight will include a real-time discrimination feedback system, 1 report, 1 investigation. Rebecca continued. And we will allocate $500,000 annually from our operations fund to establish aviation scholarships for students of color, indigenous communities, and other underserved groups. Outside the glass room, Sarah Chen continued to record. Her voice cracked. This isn't a gotcha video. This is a lesson in how one man turned insult into institutional reform. They weren't just fired. An entire industry is shifting before our eyes. In the hallway, Jessica trembled. Brad lowered his head. No one forced them out. But the stares from colleagues like witnesses to history said everything. Julian stood by the window. Planes continued landing in the distance. He checked his phone. A message from his assistant. Customer response is breaking records. Good Morning America is requesting an interview tomorrow morning. Interested? Julian typed back. Only if they ask about solutions, not about the insult. He looked up. The sky hadn't changed. But the way we look at each other, we just had. 7:12 a.m. New York Live on Good Morning America. Julian Carter appeared not as an angry executive, but as a father, a husband, and a black man who had had enough. The host asked Mr. Carter, "Why didn't you get angry Sue or call out the company publicly? Why choose to fix the problem from the inside quietly?" Julian gave a tired but proud smile. "Because I don't want revenge. I want to redesign the blueprint. I want my daughter to be able to sit in any seat on any plane without having to prove she deserves to be there." Meanwhile, at airline headquarters across the country, at Delta United and American Airlines, emergency meetings were underway. CEOs stared at the latest numbers. Skybridge stock rose 12% in just 18 hours. Sarah Chen's live stream had surpassed 7 million views across 5 platforms. 54% of Americans reported a loss of trust in airlines lacking clear anti-discrimination policies. Behind closed doors, executives murmured, "What do we do before the media calls us the ones who stood by while history was being written?" In San Francisco, a 19-year-old named Layla Jenkins watched Julian's video and decided to apply to aerospace engineering school. She tweeted, "If he can change an airline, maybe I can change a factory." Her tweet was retweeted over 125,000 times in just 4 hours. In Washington, D.C., a black member of Congress shared Julian's clip writing, "This is why we need real policies for equity in air travel. Not for favoritism, but to restore fairness that was taken away." In Los Angeles, Sarah Chen had breakfast with Julian at a small cafe. No cameras, no live stream, just a quiet thank you. She said, "I started this as someone curious, but now I feel like I have a responsibility." Julian looked at her, not with the eyes of a CEO, but of a man who had survived on silence. Sometimes a camera turned on at the right moment can illuminate an entire blind system. Across airports from Chicago to Miami, flight attendants received an emergency company-wide email. From this day forward, every passenger, regardless of skin color, attire, or accent, must be greeted with a smile and respect. If you feel unable to do that, resign. We'll find someone who can. Back at home, Julian declined every interview invitation that followed. He took off his suit and sat beside his 8-year-old daughter, Naomi Carter. She asked Daddy, "Were you sad when they made you move seats?" Julian gently ran a hand over her hair, then smiled, "No." Because it was there that I saw what needed to change. On the living room wall, he hung a photo. Not of his signing the termination papers, but of Naomi smiling widely in first class for the first time. Not because her father was CEO, but because no one asked her whether she belonged. Later that evening, Julian sat alone in his 38th floor office marble floor, cold beneath the golden sunset. Outside the window, planes rose and fell like distant ghosts, fading unfamiliar and silent, much like the way he'd have been treated only days ago. On his desk were 3 thick binders, each marked with a red label. HARP High Altitude Respect Protocol. Q3 Internal Complaints Report. Naomi Academy Aviation Scholarships for Minority Youth. No sound. Just the scratch of his Mont Blanc pen on paper. Each stroke was a cut through the old system that had once pushed him from first class in an airline he had built. Julian didn't seek revenge. He sought reconstruction. The Skybridge Airlines Board of Directors convened in an emergency session. But the tension in the room wasn't just because of a viral live stream. It was because the man at the head of the table sat in silence, opening documents without even saying his name. That silence quieted everyone else. Julian began not with blame, not with outrage, but with a story. When I was 11, my mother was denied boarding for wearing clothes they said weren't passenger appropriate. She sat crying in the parking lot for 3 hours while I flew home alone. I'll never forget her worn shoes. Like I'll never forget the look in the flight attendant eyes that day. It looked a lot like Jessica S. Some eyes in the room dropped. No one spoke. Julian continued, "I don't want apologies. I want action. And this time, action must come from above." He placed the binder for the HARP initiative on the table, a real-time accountability and reporting system for crew behavior on every flight. Every seat would have a tablet for passengers to rate their experience live. Reports of discriminatory behavior would be sent directly to an independent oversight team. Each crew member would undergo 40 hours of unconscious bias and micro-behavior training per year. "No more half-hearted nods in training," Julian said firmly. "I want every employee in this company to understand what it feels like to be doubted just for wearing the wrong kind of suit." Then he opened another file, the Naomi Fund. I named it after my daughter. She once dreamed of becoming a pilot until her classmates laughed and told her, "You are too brown to fly." The fund would provide $500,000 annually in scholarships for Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian students who aspire to become pilots, aerospace engineers, or ground control officers. This meeting wasn't just a meeting anymore. It had become a hearing on dignity. Julian left the room with an official directive. Skybridge Airlines would become the first carrier to install a live bias monitoring system on board every aircraft. That night, an email went out to all 12,000 employees. From this day forward, every discriminatory act, no matter how small, is a judgment on your career. There will be no second chances, no misunderstandings. Serve not because the customer pays, but because they carry human dignity. Outside, Sarah Chen, the travel blogger, was editing her viral live stream into a short documentary. The man asked to leave his seat who changed the entire sky. A significant media studio reached out, but Julian declined every request. "I don't need cameras. I need them to stop before cameras become necessary." On the rooftop of his building, Julian stood alone. The wind rustled his shirt gently. He looked up at a plane gliding across the sky. For the first time in years, it didn't feel distant. Because this time the wings had been lifted by someone who'd once been pushed from the cabin, not for lack of a ticket, but for lack of trust from those in uniform. In the dimly lit airport staff lounge, Jessica Monroe sat motionless beside a cup of cold coffee. The sterile white light from the ceiling cast a pale glow on her skin. Her face was bare, no makeup, her hair undone, hanging loosely, as if it hadn't seen a brush all morning. In her hand, her phone replayed yesterday's live stream. Her face, cold and detached, appeared clearly in every frame. Her voice, sharp and commanding, echoed through thousands of angry comments. "Sir, this seat is not for you. Short, icy, automatic." But that single sentence had pushed her to the brink of being retained or forgotten forever. Just a few corridors away, Brad Thompson, the man who had stood beside her that day, was trying to maintain his composure as he sat across from the company's legal team. Yet every time the conference room door opened and a legal representative stepped inside, Brad blinked. He had served for 17 years. But one wrong judgment, one biased glance was enough to turn 17 years to dust. "I used to think I was following protocol," Brad said, until I looked into his eyes. Not angry, not hurt, just disappointed. Elsewhere, Sarah Chen, the travel blogger who had filmed the entire incident, sat on a bus ride home. Her laptop on her lap, she edited the final sequence for her short documentary, The Man Who Wasn't Angry, Only Asked to Be Seen. She hadn't expected that a video meant to expose a moment would become course material in business schools within just 3 days. She also hadn't expected to receive an email from Skybridge Airlines. "We are honored to invite you to join the Naomi Scholarship Program, which aims to help build a new kind of aviation industry." Sarah laughed softly through quiet tears. The woman who once captured the moment was now invited into the cabin not as a passenger, but as a steward of dignity aboard every flight. And then there was Richard Davidson, the middle-aged man who had been gifted seat 2A by Jessica. He walked into an emergency board meeting at Davidson Logistics. Inside, shareholders were livid. On the screen were headline slides. Logistics CEO exposed for complicity in racial bias. Skybridge Partnership canceled 32M. Deal withdrawn. First-class passenger removed was a major shareholder in Davidson Industries. "I didn't know I couldn't have known." Davidson stammered, sweat dripping down his temple. A female board member stared him down. "It's because you didn't know that you're unfit to lead." And Julian Carter. He didn't show up on the news. He didn't hold a press conference. Instead, he visited a community school in the south side of Chicago where he had grown up. He handed the principal an envelope. Inside was a grant that would fund 50 Black, Latinx, and Asian students in a basic aviation training program, including trial flights, simulators, and career prep. "I can't fix every airport, but I can start with the place where they once told me black kids don't fly that high," the principal cried. That evening at the Los Angeles airport front desk, a newly hired staff member cautiously approached an older man who had wandered away from his gate. "Sir, may I assist you in finding something?" The man smiled. His shirt was faded. His hair is silver. "Yes," he said gently. "Help me find the seat where I belong." The staff member didn't know that this older gentleman was the one who rewrote the rules of American aviation with nothing but one forced walk from first class. 6 months later, in a quiet lecture hall at Harvard Business School, MBA students sat in rapt attention. On the projector screen behind the speaker was the title, "Leading with Dignity: The Flight That Changed an Industry." The man at the podium wore a charcoal suit and a dark tie. His face was calm, his eyes sharp but not cold. Julian Carter, chairman of Wellington Group, and once just a passenger in seat 2A. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He told a story. "That day, I was asked to leave a seat I had purchased on an airline I owned because I didn't look like someone who belonged there." The room went still. I didn't to sue. I didn't to shout. I rewrote the entire policy, so the next person wouldn't have to endure that. He clicked the remote. On-screen charts appeared. Customer satisfaction up from 3.2 to 4.7 in 6 months. Discrimination complaints down by 78%. Minority employee retention up 34%. 120 scholarships granted to students of color pursuing aviation careers. Justice isn't just firing a few people. Real justice is changing the system that made them believe their actions were acceptable. At Skybridge headquarters, new plaques have been hung in every meeting room. Dignity is not earned. It is never optional. At major airports, real-time passenger feedback systems were launched. At the first sign of bias, the internal response team would activate within 24 hours. And in a quiet corner of Chicago S. O'Hare Airport, the very place Julian had once been asked to give up his seat, now stood a waiting lounge named the Carter Suite, dedicated to those who believe in quiet power and justice without anger. Every week, hundreds of travelers sat beneath the words engraved into the wall. You don't have to shout to be heard. You only have to know who you are and walk in like the door was always yours. As for Jessica and Brad, they faced justice, but they were not abandoned. They joined the redemption. Through education program founded by Julian himself to study unconscious bias, the history of discrimination in service, and how to rebuild trust where it had once been broken. Today, Jessica works as a frontline training advisor at a regional airline. Brad now teaches recruits how to serve without prejudice. They couldn't erase the past, but they learned to give back what they had once taken through action. The story closes with Julian seated by the window on a quiet night flight, this time no one asking him to move. A South Asian flight attendant addressed him by name. "Mr. Carter, coffee as usual, sir?" "Yes, thank you," he said with a smile. He opened his small notebook and wrote one final line for his following speech. "Leadership is not the power you hold, it's how you use it to protect the dignity of those without a voice." This story began in silence and ended in the spread of truth. You don't need to retaliate. You need to stand firm in dignity and let the world reshape itself around your stillness. Have you ever had to prove you were worthy because of the color of your skin, your name, your clothes? If so, remember this: you are not alone. Let this story be a light in the darkest corners of the system. And if you've ever been denied, walk forward as if you own the path.